the sheet had to turn red, not because of pain, but because tradition demanded proof. She lay there in silence. A crowd waited outside, the priest, the midwife, the mother-in-law, each hoping for blood. No stain, no scream, no salvation. Her body was not enough. Her word meant nothing. Her survival wasn't required. This was not a wedding. It was a trial. And the punishment was death. The bed wasn't just a bed. It was a courtroom. And the sheet was evidence. She was young, sometimes too young to bleed. But that didn't matter. They were watching, waiting, for the red mark to appear, as if virginity were something that could be measured in thread count and pigment. It had to be white at the start, and stained before sunrise. That was the rule. No blood meant no proof, and no proof meant no purity. No one asked if she was in pain, or if it had already been taken from her long before the wedding. Her body was not a witness, only the linen spoke. And if the linen stayed clean, they called her a liar. They never cared what purity meant. They only cared what it looked like. And in their world, it looked like blood. Red on white. One stain to prove a girl was clean. Not loyal, not honest, not kind, just unbroken. They preached it from the altar. They carved it into law. They passed it down like sacred truth, that a woman's worth could be seen in a single night and a single drop. And so, blood became the measure, the requirement, the ritual. They called it tradition, but it was a sentence, one that required no crime, only the absence of a stain. You could be silent, obedient, even untouched. But if the sheet stayed white, you were already guilty. It wasn't just the husband or the family. Sometimes it was the entire village. They gathered at dawn, faces tight, whispers sharp, waiting to see the linen. The sheet would be raised like a flag or dropped like a sentence, and everyone watched. Grandmothers, midwives, priests, even the children, all trained to read one thing, red or not. It wasn't curiosity, it was surveillance, a public trial disguised as celebration. The bride had already been judged. The crowd only came for proof. If there was blood, they cheered. If there wasn't, they stared. No screams, no outrage, just silence, like watching a crop fail or a curse return. The rules were simple. If the sheet stayed white, she wasn't a wife. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask what happened. They only asked to see the proof. If there was blood, she was pure. If there wasn't, she was impure, unworthy, defective, returned. Some were sent back to their fathers. Some were beaten. Some were handed to priests to be cleansed. And some were buried, not under stone, but under shame. It didn't matter that the body doesn't always bleed, or that the man didn't wait, or that the girl was too young. The system needed red, and if it didn't get red, it demanded flesh. Marriage was not a union, it was a test. And if you failed the test, you disappeared. They built a system on a body part that barely exists. The hymen, a thin fold, variable, invisible, sometimes present, sometimes not, but always expected to break, on cue. Doctors knew it wasn't reliable. Midwives whispered that it meant nothing, but the men didn't care. They needed a symbol, something small enough to hide, and vague enough to weaponize. So they turned it into law, into dogma, into fear. And suddenly, a piece of tissue became more important than the woman it belonged to. She could be faithful. She could be untouched. She could even be a child. But if the hymen didn't perform, she was impure. Not because of her body, but because of their myth. He didn't need proof. He didn't need witnesses. He only needed to say it. She wasn't a virgin. That was enough. Enough to return her. Enough to ruin her. Enough to kill her. No blood? His word confirmed it. Blood present? He could say it wasn't hers. There were no appeals, no cross-examination, only silence from her and agreement from everyone else. Sometimes he lied, sometimes he was drunk, sometimes he just didn't like her. But the law didn't care. It trusted him because he was the man, because he had seen her. Because in their world, truth didn't belong to the body. It belonged to the husband. And he could destroy her just by speaking. It wasn't always private. Some were dragged outside, a courtyard, a churchyard, a public square. The husband would speak, the midwife would nod, and the girl would stand alone, wrapped in white, silent, unarmed. They called it clarification, but there was no truth to find, only shame to display and blood to punish. The crowd didn't ask questions. They watched, they listened, they whispered. Some spat, some pointed, some smiled, and the girl, who might have done nothing wrong, was forced to prove a purity that didn't exist. Not in her body, not in their laws, not in this theater where everyone wanted a villain and no one wanted facts. They were women, but they didn't protect her. The midwife, the aunt, the village healer, they were called in to inspect, to confirm, to declare, with fingers, with eyes, sometimes with knives. They said they could feel it, the seal, the tightness, the proof that a girl had not been touched. But what they really did was make it official. If the husband accused, they examined. If the sheet was clean, they confirmed. They spoke the words that no one questioned, because women who judged women made the punishment feel righteous. But they weren't doctors. They weren't neutral. They were part of it. And they learned to trade mercy for power. One hymen at a time. The church didn't invent virginity, but it sanctified it. They called it holy, a divine state, a gift for God or husband, whichever came first. Priests preached it from pulpits. Saints were canonized for it, and blood became more than proof. It became grace. No stain, no salvation. A clean sheet was a spiritual failure. Girls were taught to fear their own bodies, to guard an invisible line, to believe that purity was the only thing keeping them safe, from sin, from shame, from fire. Confessors asked questions, too specific, too cruel, and always one-sided. They called it moral guidance, but it was surveillance, wrapped in incense, signed with a cross. And once the church claimed her purity, it claimed her punishment too. Where there's fear, there's business, and purity became profitable. When the stakes were death, people started selling survival. There were women who prepared fake blood, from chicken livers, beet juice, red wine, wrapped in rags, hidden between thighs, timed with the wedding night. Some sold virgin kits. Some offered acting lessons. Some rented out stained sheets to pass inspections. They called it deceit, but it was protection. Not everyone could afford it. But those who did bought time, bought safety, bought the illusion of virtue. Men raged at the lies. Priests condemned the fraud. But they never questioned the reason it existed. Because if a clean sheet meant shame, then blood, real or not, was currency. And purity was always for sale. Some were 12, some were 10. Some still held dolls when the marriage was arranged. They didn't know about blood, or purity, or what waited for them after the vows. They were led to the bed like lambs, not to be loved, but to be tested. Their bodies hadn't bled before. Sometimes they couldn't bleed at all. Too small, too soft, too unfinished. But the law didn't pause. The husband didn't hesitate. And the crowd still waited for Red. When it didn't come, she was blamed. Too cold, too broken, too sinful for not bleeding on command. They called her impure, but it wasn't impurity. It was childhood. And they punished her for not being a woman fast enough. They knew the rules, and they knew the cost of breaking them. So the mothers prepared, not with blessings, but with blood. Some hid vials under the mattress. Some soaked cotton in goat's liver. Some whispered instructions the night before about timing, pressure, silence. They didn't believe in the ritual. They feared it. And they passed that fear down like an heirloom. Don't cry. Don't move. Make it quick. Not for beauty, not for romance, but to survive the test. It wasn't maternal. It wasn't holy. It was strategy. Because if the sheet stayed white, her daughter would be ruined. And no mother wants to bury a child over a lie woven into linen. So they learned to bleed early, or fake it well. Not for virtue, but for survival. She didn't scream, because there was no space for that. No court, no plea, no ear willing to listen. She was not allowed to speak, but everyone was allowed to judge. The mother-in-law could demand a second test. The priest could call for cleansing. The neighbors could whisper her name like a curse. And the husband, he could leave, or stay, or kill. She didn't resist, because resistance made it worse. They said obedience was proof of innocence until it wasn't. She bled, but not where they could see. She broke, but only in the places no one cared to check. And through it all, she remained still. Not because she was strong, but because no one gave her permission to fall apart. There was no middle ground, no safe name, no word a girl could wear without being punished for it. If she bled, they called her pure. But if she bled too much, they called her sick, unfit, weak. If she didn't bleed, they called her spoiled, or sinful, or not a girl at all. And if she fought back, if she screamed or ran or dared to speak, they didn't call her a wife. They called her a witch. One word could make her untouchable. The other made her disposable. She couldn't be respected, only feared or used. They chose the label that fit their need. And once they spoke it aloud, she wasn't a person anymore. She was a verdict. For the nobles, virginity was never about virtue. It was about leverage. A daughter's purity wasn't a gift. It was an asset to be traded, pledged, or withheld for land, for titles, for power. The blood on the sheet didn't prove honor. It sealed contracts, bound alliances, started wars. Some girls were inspected twice, before marriage and after. Their bodies became evidence in deals made between men who would never bleed. A wife with no blood could end a treaty. A scandal in the sheets could collapse a throne. And if the girl failed the game, she wasn't punished as a sinner. She was punished as a liability. They didn't care if she was honest, or loyal, or terrified. They only cared if she bled on schedule. Some girls didn't wait to be judged. They knew what the sheet demanded, and they knew their bodies wouldn't deliver it. So they prepared. Not prayers, not hope, but blood, their own. Before the wedding, they bit their lips until it poured. They scratched their thighs raw. Some slid knives across their palms and pressed the wounds against linen, so the stains would be waiting before anyone came looking. They didn't do it for love, or shame, or even deception. They did it to survive the night, to pass the test, to make sure no one ever opened their legs for the sake of evidence again. It wasn't betrayal, it was strategy. Because they weren't brides. They were witnesses, fabricating proof to protect themselves from a truth no one wanted to hear. That virginity never bled on command. But girls could. The test didn't vanish. It just moved indoors, sterilized, labeled, and billed. Now the girl lies under hospital lights, legs open, gown loose, heart silent, while someone in a white coat decides if her body still qualifies as untouched. They don't look at her face. They look for folds, for tightness, for something invisible that no one has ever proven but everyone insists must be found. They call it medicine, but it follows the same script. No blood, no proof, no purity. Some doctors whisper that it's pointless. Others say it's necessary. And some just perform the ritual without blinking, as if the checklist in their hands carries more truth than anything the girl could ever say. And when it's over, they hand her a paper to say she's clean, not safe, not healed, just clean. They say it belongs to the past, but the paperwork says otherwise. More than 20 countries still allow it. Some demand it for school, some for marriage, some for employment, and all of them say the same thing, that purity must be proved and women must comply. It's legal, sanctioned, stamped, and sold. Doctors offer it as a service. Governments accept it as cultural. And families, they ask for it like it's a vaccine, as if fear of shame were an epidemic that needed to be prevented at all costs. No one questions whether it's accurate or ethical or real. They just follow the form, tick the boxes, print the result. And when the girl walks out, still intact, still alone, she is not safer. She is just officially invisible. They said they needed blood to know she was clean. But the truth was simpler. They needed a reason to hurt her, to doubt her, to silence her. Blood was just the easiest. It didn't argue. It didn't speak. It didn't complicate the story with things like consent or trauma or memory. They built rituals around it, wrote laws about it, named saints and sinners by it. But blood was never the proof, because some girls bled when they shouldn't have, and some didn't even when they were untouched. Still, they believed the linen. They praised the stain. They punished the absence. Not because blood revealed the truth, but because it gave them permission to ignore it. They did everything right. They stayed quiet. They stayed small. They stayed untouched. They obeyed the rules. They kept their legs closed. They bled when they were supposed to, or pretended to when their bodies wouldn't. They prayed. They waited. They suffered politely. And still, they were burned. They were buried. They were erased. Not because they failed the test, but because the test was always made to find someone guilty. Virginity never saved them. It never could. Because no matter how much blood they gave, it was never enough to make them human. The test is gone. The blood dried centuries ago. But the punishment never really ended. It just learned how to dress itself in silence.